Since the end of the Korean War in 1953, North and South Korea maintain a pretty hostile relationship, and a second Korean War has nearly broken out between the two sides quite a few times from 1953 to the present day, one of which was the DMZ Conflict, which was a series of low-level armed clashes between North Korean forces and that of South Korea and the United States. This conflict largely occurred between 1966 and 1969 along the Korean Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. Before I get into context and conditions on how the DMZ conflict could have erupted into the Second Korean War and what the war might look like, there is another major conflict going on at the same time, the Vietnam War. Now, the war in Vietnam saw the American public opinion fluctuate greatly until the Tet Offensive of 1968, and during Tet regarding the DMZ conflict, President Johnson had thought that North Korean forces had coordinated with the Viet Cong in trying to divert and overstretch U.S. resources. Additionally, the North Koreans had sought to create an insurgency in South Korea as they were inspired by the Viet Cong in Vietnam. So in order for the DMZ conflict to escalate into a second Korean War, a condition might be for the US and China to not be involved in Vietnam. The DMZ conflict took a major backseat compared to the Vietnam War in the US public eye, as America was pretty focused on everything going on in Vietnam, especially with the Tet Offensive. Additionally, China had a total of 320,000 troops in the Vietnam War from 1965 to 1973 and wasn't really looking to invade South Korea. So now that, for whatever reason, the Tet Offensive doesn't happen when it does, and the US and China have significantly reduced focus on Vietnam, I'll talk about 3 points where the DMZ conflict could have become the Second Korean War, and all 3 took place in 1968. First up is Unit 124's assassination attempt in the Blue House Raid, which was a raid launched by North Korean Black Ops commandos in an attempt to assassinate South Korean President Park Chung-hee in his residency at Blue House in Seoul on January 21, 1968. In this raid, a 30-man team of Unit 124 crossed the DMZ, but was intercepted by police near the residency of the president. In the ensuing pursuit, all but 2 of the commandos were killed or committed suicide. 1 was captured and 1 fled back to North Korea. South Korean casualties totaled 26 killed and 66 wounded, including about 24 civilians, and there were also 4 Americans killed. But President Park was left unharmed. Next up is the USS Pueblo incident, which occurred on January 23, 1968, where North Korean patrol boats operating under cover of MiG-21 fighters captured the American USS Pueblo ship in international waters northeast of Busan, killing 1 crewman. The other 83 crewmen were captured and tortured by the North Koreans. President Johnson ordered a show of force with a massive deployment of U.S. Air and Navy assets to Korea under the codenames Operation Combat Fox and Operation Formation Star, where over 200 combat aircraft and 6 aircraft carriers plus support vessels were deployed to Korea, in addition to the partial mobilization of reserves for the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. In February, the U.S. agreed to send South Korea $100 million of immediate military aid, which included F-4 Phantom II fighter jets. As the U.S. was not interested in escalating the conflict in Korea, President Park was told that more U.S. aid would come as long as South Korea did not go north to retaliate without a U.S. and South Korean joint agreement to do so. A third side of potential escalation is the Yuljin-Samcheok landings by North Korean forces from October to December of 1968. And in these landings, basically the North Koreans had difficulties getting through the DMZ at this point, and decided to send Unit 124 to land at Yuljin-Samcheok in South Korea to indoctrinate farmers who the North Koreans thought were less educated than the rest of the South Korean population so they could get them to start an insurgency. But the South Koreans and Americans decisively defeated the North Koreans in these landings, and the North then decided to abandon infiltration operations in 1969. All 3 of these instances could have each started the Second Korean War during the DMZ conflict on their own, with some changes made. But they would all create different scenarios as they all came at different times, and different circumstances would produce 3 different alternate history scenarios. So for the purposes of this video, I will have Park Chung-hee be injured in the assassination attempt, and the Yuljin-Samcheok landings will take place earlier to spark more fear in the South Korean government. The war starts with South Korean and U.S. forces within Korea launching an immediate counterstrike against North Korea following the assassination attempt and the North Korean seizure of the USS Pueblos. F-4 Phantom IIs hit a few military targets in North Korea and demand the return of the crew of the USS Pueblo. The North Koreans refuse and launch a full invasion into South Korea with Chinese support, but the Soviets are going to cut off all aid to North Korea, as in our timeline, Brezhnev specifically said that he had no interest in another Korean War in the 1960s, especially with lots of other conflicts going on at the same time. The U.S. response to the North Korean invasion will be immediate, large-scale, heavy bombings of North Korean infrastructure. B-52s and F-4s destroy any North Korean sites that they see fit, and American forces are sent back into Korea. There's little that North Korea can do against U.S. air power, and China increases their support for the North Koreans. The thing is that U.S. and South Korean forces are not going to want to provoke China once again into direct intervention. The Chinese will deploy troops to the border with North Korea as a message to the United States and South Korea to not go too far into North Korea as China is ready to intervene. So Pyongyang will be the stopping point for the U.S. and South Korean troops. There's no argument that the North Korean forces would be decimated, and I'm going to go with the war ending in 1968 if nobody provokes China into direct intervention. The end of the war will see pretty much everyone in the world on high alert, as it's possible that South Korea annexes some land from North Korea, but not Pyongyang, as the North Korean state will have to exist as a condition for China not getting involved in the war. Broader effects on the Cold War will be that the U.S. has reinforced its commitments to defending states which they have a treaty with. Turning back to Vietnam, this alternate Vietnam War will have the South Vietnamese feel more emboldened to rely on U.S. support due to such a swift victory in the Second Korean War, despite the South Vietnamese government not having a defense pact with the United States. Additionally, I think that the Chinese and Soviet Union will heavily support the North Vietnamese against the South, even more so, since they do not want a repeat of the Second Korean War happening in Vietnam. That is, of course, just one possible scenario for if the DMZ conflict erupted into the Second Korean War in 1968. What do you think would have happened? Write in the comments below, and thank you for watching.